artist could leave these in chalk outside a gallery to the left of the entrance. So, you know, if there's free booze, or the gallery doesn't pay their artists, or it's a Ponzi scheme, or if there's a pig present, mean people, you know, empty stable, maybe you should submit. There's a whole range of things that we don't necessarily talk about. If we move forward, another common practice in traditional magic are spells and hexes. There's two kinds of spells and hexes. The first is a sympathetic magic, which relies on representations of the person or the place you wish to influence through the spell or the hex. The other kind is a contagious magic, where you try to take something of the person, maybe a lock of hair, you know, some of their possessions, and then you try to invoke the spell or hex. Eric Rutan he's done this with voodoo objects. But some of the common spells and hexes in the art world that I've tried, you know, one to crush your enemies or rivals, to escape indictment by local rulers, for selling objects for vast sums, to summon an important critic to your show, or again to ward off annoying bloggers, to prevent mediocre work, the conjuration of new ideas, to reveal anonymous trolls on the internet would be wonderful. To discover a free studio space, to conjure a studio minion to do your work. And now, when you practice sorcery, and there's enough belief to like fill this room, which is scary, and I hope that some of them are for me, and some are probably here for Hyperallergic and Hrag. I was actually interested in seeing if I could summon an assistant. And so, through the magic of Twitter, I sent out a request, and Jesse magically appeared. So it's amazing what you can do with the power of art. So, you know, some of these, you know, spells and hexes may or may not work to conjure a massive controversy. You know, to compel an art dealer to speak the truth, that's really, that might require a lot of sacrifice. There will be no killing of chickens or anything here tonight. We move forward. Now, concerning the operator, one of the things about magic, or like traditional magic, is that the operator is supposed to remain celibate for 30 days. They are supposed to abstain from all manner of vice and drugs and alcohol. In traditional magic, you are supposed to be good to do evil. And traditionally they invoke the tetragrammaton or Jehovah as the main source of power. Not so in composite art magic. In fact, you probably should be drunk. It seems to be a career requirement. You should also just admit your evil thoughts, or your misgivings, or envies, or greed, just to get it out of the way. And another thing that you need to do, if you go to the next one, is you need to acknowledge why you're making art, or magic, or art magic, whatever it is. You know, if you're sort of honest with yourself about the motivations between what is actually desired, you can try to attain that. Right? You can try to get through that gap that seems to exist for so many of us. So if we move on, one of the things that I've realized is that unlike being an artist, that when I was fairly young, I decided I'm going to try to be an artist. No one in the family thought it was a good idea. They were really upset, and but I didn't realize that I was practicing sorcery until much later into my art career. In fact, it's been made very aware to me that I've been perhaps exploiting the power of others. I've been drawing down and borrowing from their power. And in around 2005, I remember going to the Greater New York Show and seeing the Stain of Shit's painting. It was the biggest painting I'd ever seen. I just hadn't seen a painting this big in a long time. I wondered where all the paint had gone in New York City. It was here. And she was an artist who had gone from Colombia in about a year and a half to the Venice Biennale, which is sort of like the dream for artists. And so there was at that point, there was a huge gap between what was for me as an artist. I was actually more of a critic at the time, writing for the Rail, and thinking and hoping about shows. So what was desired was perhaps to be in this art show. So I went back to my studio, and I did this drawing. And it was just a very small piece of paper about Daniel's painting. And unlike anything else I'd ever made up to that point, people actually looked at it and stopped And whether it was Damon's name or the reference to the painting or something about it, it started to draw some attention to my work. And I realized at that point that there was something to, whether it's criticism, because critics do this all the time, they're free to invoke names, unlike artists or dealers, or most people in the art world kind of do not speak specifically or invoke the names of the people that they envy or are desirous of, or wish they had that career or made work like that. So again, at this point, I had no idea necessarily that I was practicing any kind of sorcery. We move on. Then I decided that maybe it would be interesting to see how much people really believe in art as a sort of magic. And so I put a curse on Zach Foyer. And this hex was, in Latin, it just says make me famous. I didn't think, again, I don't believe in magic. I just thought it would be interesting to see how this would go over. Zach just had a very awful reaction to this drawing in the booth that I believe it was at Pulse in like 2006. Basically, one thing about magic is that it almost always involves the use of language for its inherent ability to influence the universe. Bronislaw Martin Wachowski says, the knowledge of the right words, appropriate phrases, gives man a power over and above his limited field of personal action. And at this point, my field of personal action was really, really limited. Eventually, Zach walked away from this drawing, and when I started to realize that magic could be efficacious, or that this actually could draw upon some belief in the power of art, he sent me a letter back. So it actually had a real effect. This hex induced a reaction about 9 months later from him, where he explained, basically he said, I encourage you to ignore the elements you find offensive in the current art world and simply pass over the artists you think should be passed over. Art will progress only if all attacks on the previous generation or current mainstream are made by simply making better art, not writing bitter letters or drawings. It's too late. Like, that hex just spread through the art world. Traditionally or in modern language, to say it was a meme that's kind of spread around, this sort of piece of gossip. But I prefer to think of it as magic. This hex actually worked. So if we move on, I decided that, that there was something to this idea of trying to use auto-suggestion or to influence people's minds. And magic is a functional art. It seeks tangible results, but it's secretive and rarely performed in public. Which brings up the question, somebody asked me, well, you were just doing the show Class, which was somewhat, it was a very public show, it was about access and being transparent in the art world, but that's the antithesis of like the studio practice, which happens in secret and you do it by yourself and kind of induces madness after a while. And so, on some level, this is more of an acknowledgement of this kind of practice. So in this particular drawing, I asked somebody if they would just buy this drawing right now because I was broke, and they did. And so there seemed to be some magical element to this. If we move on, I also suggested why you should buy the artwork. It seems a little odd to put the rationale right in there, but it worked. Move on. Some magic takes a long time. You can't expect the change to happen overnight, but in 2006, I actually did it was actually 2007, a fictional review for a show that I had done that didn't get a review. It took another 2 years, but I finally got an actual New York Times review. So again, it's sort of, this notion that magic actually can have a form.